It's always good to be in Perth, but especially since last weekend we had this horrendous blizzard in New York, and at my house it was almost a meter of snow. So for many, many reasons, thank God you get to be here, but especially for that. And we'll coach you on some manhood things and cigars and other stuff later. I'll do that. Tonight I want to look into another one of the fun Jesus stories. Very often when we're around faith, we talk in terms of him healing people, and then we categorize and say, this was a physical healing or they were healed of something. Tonight's passage we're going to look at is an entire life healing. You don't get those very often, mostly because we don't know how to access it. So in order to have conversations like this, you have to do a little bit of the language of deep emotion. Not something that, let's just do some, not stereotypes, but because he said he's not sure what I do. I'm actually a professor of a doctoral program in New York. And so this is my 29th year as a grad school prof, and now for 5 years, exclusively run doctoral program. So I don't get to hang out with the coolest people. I have to do those people. But one of the things we talk about is sociotypes. Like, what are the cultural patterns that actually can be documented? And so if we look at Western Australians, and forgive me as we look at Asians in general, but even the subcategory where some of you come from, not known to be the most expressive people emotionally. Again, by your response, that tells us yes. So strap in. Strap in. We're going to walk you through a passage that just requires that you sort of engage deeply with this passage, because you can't just read this one. So let me just sound briefly like a professor for a moment. I'll only do it a few times while we're here. But the first one is there are 6 primary human emotions: sad, angry, scared, happy, excited, tender. The first set you sort of know: sad, angry, scared. You don't like them, but you know them. Now, I'm willing to bet that if we went anywhere in WA and tried to survey as many blokes as possible and said to them, "Mate, how you going? What are you feeling?" You'd have a hard time finding any male in WA who would go, "I'm a little tender today." It's just not a word we use. And if so, you'd go, "I'm not sure I want to talk to him. This is going to be a whole different kind of conversation." However, it only takes 2 questions to access what that tenderness is for him. Now, as a prof forever, I used to have summers off for about 4 months, and I'd always take on a big reading project. So project for me was always, I'm one of those people that decided a long time ago I wanted to be a reader. So for more than 20 years, I read 4 new books every week. But I would take on this summer reading project. One year, I read 41 books on failure. That was so fun. I was so motivated by the end. My favorite book was called Complete and Utter Failure. That was my favorite. But one summer, I read 37 books on women and emotions. Oh, dear God. The conclusion I came to at the end is God alone understands women. If indeed he does. Because what I discovered, I had books from 8 different countries, the authors from 8 nationalities. And what I found interesting is how they often contradicted each other in the research. And finally, there was one that was honest enough to say, if you do a survey of the same woman 3.5 weeks apart, you'll get completely different responses. I went, finally, I'm understood here. So let's begin in Luke chapter 7. I'm always fascinated by what sort of person put the headings in your Bibles. Now, I don't know what yours says, but the heading in my Bible in Luke chapter 7, beginning in verse 36, the title is, Jesus is anointed by a sinful woman. And I'm going, really? That's like your best shot? A bad creative day for you? Jesus anointed by a sinful woman. Come on, mate, be a little more creative than that. Just listen for a moment. Now, one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. Reclined at the table is a key phrase for where we go next. When a woman who'd lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume. And she stood behind him, right at his feet, weeping. And then she began to wet his feet with her tears, and then wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume upon them. Now, when the Pharisee who'd invited Jesus saw this, he thought, wouldn't he know what kind of woman this was and that she was actually a sinner? Now, apparently, sense of humor in first century ancient Near East and humor in 21st century Perth are two very different things. Because this is a funny story, and none of you are laughing. So you obviously have not engaged in deep human emotion, or you would be laughing. Or you're so used to when the Bible is read, it's like the words of God, and no one dare laugh. Folks, this is a funny story. I don't care who you are or where you're from. This is a funny story. Give me a couple minutes to unpack this for you. Here's the story. This narrative overview goes like this. This is a male-only, invitation-only party, sort of high-level, exclusive party. So here comes the woman, and she enters uninvited. Now, get this, culturally. I mean, it would be strange for you, but culturally, she should never have been there. So it's this exclusive dinner party, invitation only for men, and in walks a woman, uninvited. And not only does she come in uninvited, but she doesn't stay quietly in the corner. She makes quite a scene. They're reclining. They don't sit on chairs. It's still like when you go to one of those sort of Middle Eastern restaurants now, your table's about 18 to 20 inches high. You have pillows. You lean on them. Your feet are behind you. She stands behind Jesus and starts to cry. Now, I just need to know my audience. Whenever you come into a place like this, you go, I have no idea who's here. I mean, you're obviously a good-looking crowd, seemingly relatively intelligent. But I just need to know a couple more things about you. So I'll ask a couple of accountability questions. Number one, in the last 18 months, how many of you have crashed a party? Okay, not a terribly exciting crowd. Okay, just checking. Need to know who's here. So she crashes the party, but she doesn't just come and do this quietly, as we said. She stands behind him, she brings his perfume, and she begins to weep. Now, there's just a couple things we have to clarify here. Men, let's just be honest. One of the times we are most uncomfortable in life is when the woman in our life starts to cry. Now, there's levels of this. There's crying, there's sobbing, and it moves on from there. I won't give you all the descriptors. And we know, you know that we know, we're the most uncomfortable when that happens because we're going, what do we do? Or often, what did we do? So, Daniel, just always apologize. Just do. It's probably your fault. And so, women, we kind of know that you know this about us, and we feel like you use it against us. Usually level of laughter, level of guilt go together. So there we go. We're all set here. So she starts to cry, and she stands behind Jesus, and she wets his feet with her tears. Now, this is a little strange. And then she does this other thing. She takes, of course, her head would have been covered. She takes the head covering off, folds it back, unfolds her hair, kneels down behind him, and starts to dry his feet with her tears. Now, again, I don't care where you're from. This is a weird story. It's a little awkward. And then she begins to kiss his feet. Now, I asked one previous question of accountability, so let's do another one. In the last 18 months, how many of you have had somebody kissing your feet in public? I'm a little worried about somebody over here. I'm not going to point them out, but I'm a little worried back here. So she makes quite a scene. And not only that, she brings in this big jar of perfume. Now, if you haven't figured this out yet, men and women view smells very differently. You're aware of this. Women, of course, like things that smell good. So they have all sorts of, spend lots of money on things to smell good. If you're ever at a mall and there's like a candle store, how many men do you see in there? Like, do you see a couple guys and go, smell this one? I think it's Burberry. It just doesn't happen. Men, on the other hand, like things that smell strange. Any bloke that has a gym bag that doesn't get washed very often, yeah, a couple of you guys going, I have one of those. Leave it in the trunk, I leave it in the boot, it's been in the back seat of my car. So you pull it out and you go, I wonder how long this stuff's been in here. So you pull it out, and what does every man do? He sniffs it. It's so barbaric, but every guy, every place does it. Level of laughter, level of guilt, mate, right here, buddy, you sniff it. And it's so bad, you have to share it. So you call a mate over and go, mate, smell. Seriously, it transcends culture. So in the midst of this, she brings out this very strong smelling perfume because she liked it, and all the men are go, seriously? That stuff's way too strong. Get it out of here. And she pours perfume on her feet, on his feet. So she's washed them, pours perfume on them, and kisses them. Folks, this is an odd story. I don't care what time frame, what culture, anything. It's just a strange story. It's what we call an awkward situation. And so the Pharisee who had invited Jesus says, doesn't he know who she is? Sure he does. But it's one of those classic Jesus stories. Classic for two reasons. Number one, Jesus seems to always be on the side of the one who's forgotten, the one that other people overlook. Jesus seems to always sort of identify them, be on their side, draw them in. Second reason that's a classic Jesus story is he asks this key question. He says to Simon, Jesus answered Simon and said, Simon, I want to tell you something. Just listen. Tell me, teacher, Simon said. He said, 2 men owed money to a certain money lender. One owed 500 denarii, the other only 50, but neither one could pay the money back. So he canceled the debts of both. And then he asks this question. He said, which one loved him more? There's the question. It's the question, the summary question of the entire passage. And it's the one that we have to access. Which one loved him more? You're looking at 2 people's life stories here. One respectable person, the one who had his life either managed or controlled, religious guy. The other was somebody whose life was out of control, and somehow in encountering Jesus, it took on meaning and purpose. She had a healing of her life. And Jesus uses this as a moment to teach everyone about the best of who he is. Listen to what comes next. It says, then he turned to the woman and said to Simon. Now, you got to picture this. The physicality of the room is so crucial. We already said about his feet being back, and she's standing there. So in this part of the passage, he turns to look at the woman, but he talks to Simon. It's a misdirection, but very significant. And he said, Simon, do you see this woman? And I'm sure Simon's going, see her? How could I miss her? Like she's come in, she's made quite a scene. She's made sure everybody sees her. Come on, how could I not see her? Jesus goes, do you see this woman? He said, Simon, I came into your house, mate. You didn't give me any water for my feet, yet she's wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. Simon, you didn't give me a kiss. It was true then and true now. You're in the Middle East. They always kiss cheeks, usually 2, sometimes 3. 1, 2, 3. Whenever you go cross-culturally, you always figure out which place you start and how many are there. Because if not, it's awkward. Noses get smashed. I've been in those. It's very, very strange. Unfortunately, happens to me too often. He said, you didn't even give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. He said, when you didn't put any oil on my head, very dry, arid, dusty climate, they put this refreshing sort of oil on hair. He said, you didn't give me any. You see, she's poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loves much. Remember the question, who loves the most? Jesus said, you see, she loves much. Because the one who's been forgiven little loves little. We have to talk about forgiveness. Sometimes in church, we talk about it as if everybody gets it. I'm not convinced everybody gets it. I think far too many of us, when I was a young minister, I thought, I think there are just dozens of people who come week after week. They're cognitively aware of forgiveness. They don't get it. They don't experience it. And when I wanted to be good with people outside of faith, I figured out pretty quickly, we got to come up with different ways to frame it, different phrases, a different sense. So let me try to do that. 21st century, probably the best word in the English language, no matter what country or culture you're from, the best word is probably release. Jesus released this woman. Released her from her life story. Released her from the pain and suffering. Released her from the shame and the embarrassment. Released her. He absolutely released her. And so part of this is to receive the offering, but you've got to receive this release that comes so that it can actually happen. I wondered in WA if anybody still remembered the old reruns of Oprah, and I turned on Foxtel this week and Oprah's still on, and I went, seriously? She won't die any place in the world. So it was about 4 or 5 years ago, a really close female friend called me. She goes, Martin, did you watch Oprah today? And I said, I missed Oprah today. And she said, I assumed you didn't watch it. So she said, I'm sending you overnighting a DVD. She said, based on the significance of our relationship, please tell me you'll watch it in the next week. Okay, fine. So I took off work a little early, went home, popped some popcorn. And I thought, this way I'll eat popcorn. If I don't like it, I'll throw popcorn at the screen. It works for me. So it was a classic sort of show. There were 7 people, all women, who were telling the story about how people had hurt, abused them, neglected them, let them down. I don't want to make light of their stories. It was painful human stories. But every time in the midst of their story, Oprah would stop them. And say, you have to forgive. Just very matter of fact, you have to forgive. And every single woman pushed back, like you can push back at Oprah. And they'd push back and say, but you don't understand. And Oprah goes, I don't have to. I've heard thousands of these stories. I know my own story of abuse. And she said, the issue is, if you don't forgive, that person, that incident, that event will always have control of your life. She said, you're not forgiving for their sake. It's for you, so you can be free. And I was sitting there going, you go, girl. And I'm going, Oprah gets this better than church gets this. Okay, look at me for just a minute. I'm serious. There's a couple dozen of you here, I'm sure, who are cognitively aware of the forgiveness of the Father. It's not here yet. You're still managing the old feelings. It's not how it works best. The healing of one's life brings this kind of odd freedom, like this woman who crashed a party, a place she never should have been, unapologetically expressed this profound, profound love. It's fun and weird all at the same time. Let's keep going, though. Got to experience this kind of forgiveness. There's all sorts of terminology: being forgiven, feeling forgiven, accepting forgiveness. If you're an experiential person, you experience forgiveness. If you're a cognitive person, you acknowledge it. One of the keys is to remember what all's been left behind. You don't want to focus on it, but it's significant. Daniel mentioned I do young leaders things around the world. I'm actually going to be in Indonesia in August. Lausanne Young Leaders Conference will be there. Handpicked, I think there's 750 from 150 countries, a unique place. Part of what I'm doing in Perth is writing a book that I can put in the hands of all of them who will be there. But one of the things we're always trying to do is figure out what kind of assessments work transculturally, or work best with some genders, or specifically with some cultures. The 16PF is the 16 personality factor. Seems to work well cross-culturally. I remember the first time I took it, and I read these 3 paragraphs, descriptors of me, and I thought, wow, I don't like this guy very well. So I highlighted them. As soon as I got home, I showed them to my wife, and I said, am I really that bad? Never should have asked that question. Because there was this uncomfortably long silence. And then she made me wait even longer. Cold woman. And then she spoke and she said, Martin, before you came to faith in Christ, this was you. It made me look mean, made me look like I could rip your face off and smile. And she said, before coming to a faith in Christ, this is what you were like. And she said, yeah, you're better. And then she made this profound statement. She said, if ever you don't walk with him, this is what you'll be like again. And yeah. Yeah. Don't ever forget what you have and will be released from. That's this woman's story. Amazing release. On the other hand stands this Simon narrative. Simon was the religious leader. Simon took his own junk, his own rubbish for granted. He developed what's called a religious spirit. He assumed he wasn't that bad, actually assumed he was right most of the time. And he forgot that the grace of God was for other people. He managed his life. Some of you know that one. Managed his life. And he forgot that it really was just about love. He forgot it. And he took on this religious spirit. Folks, it really is simply, it's the Jesus question, it really is about love. So let's not miss it, please. It's the greatest of the commandments. Old, New Testament, both Testaments, when Jesus asked of the greatest of the commandments, this is the one he went to. So embrace it, don't assume it. I did a conference just a couple summers ago. It was on a really nice lake. I don't know, there were probably close to 2,000 people there. A lot of executive types, people who were well-funded in life. And I was asked one night to come to a fire. And I knew the guy who invited me, but only a little. And so I said, I'm tied up, I can't get there till 11. And he goes, we'll be there till well after midnight. And he said, there'll be a good group, it'll be fun, come. And I said, well, just be men or will there be women as well? He goes, both men and women. So I got there just a little after 11. Apparently it wasn't a very exciting group because the women had all left, and it was just a dozen blokes sitting around the fire. So I walk in from the darkness and sit around the fire. And the conversation was, I saw why the women went to bed. And it wasn't a very interesting conversation. And I thought, I'm not going to sit here very long. Finally, one of the men who invited me spoke up and he said, guys, we can have this conversation anytime. It's not very often that we have someone like Martin here. I never know what that means, someone like him. I can have real fun in my mind, but I decided to stay focused this night. And he said, Martin, you always talk about going to the next level. He said, here's what we want tonight. We want you to give us the secret of going to the next level with God. And I'm going, the secret? No, nobody told me there was a secret. Like, what do I give them? I don't think I know the secret. And I thought, do I give them what they want or do I give them what they need? I said, I'm not going to play with them. I'm going to give them what they need. So I said, okay, you want the secret to going to the next level with God? I got to figure out what we're working with here. One question, only one question. And no conversation. It's a simple yes or no. Question, the only question for the evening. Do you love God with all your heart? Again, no conversation. It's a simple yes or no. Pointed to a guy I'd never met, and I said, you start. Love God with all your heart? No. 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 Number 4, yes. Okay, got a little bit to work with. 5, no. 6, no. Number 7 starts to talk. And I said, no talking boy. It's a simple yes or no. Mate, do you love God with all your heart? Shut up, put up or shut up. Do you love him with all your heart? No. I said, we knew that. That's why you talk. Because you want to clarify. No, it's a yes or a no, do you? No, well, just say so. Save our time. Finished around the circle, and the rest were no's. And I thought, how do I play this? I stood up and I said, no sense in wasting a secret on you guys. I said, here's the deal. I'm coming back tomorrow night at 11 o'clock. You do whatever it takes in this next day. This next 24 hours, you fast, you pray, you pluck your hair or beard. Old Testament, they did it. I said, there's a beach here. Stick your head in the sand till you can't breathe anymore and then stay longer. Whatever it takes to enter a no excuse zone. If you're man enough, come back tomorrow night at 11. If not, don't waste our time. And I got up and walked away. As I was walking through the darkness, I heard steps. No, I'm from New York. You hear steps, you assume the position. So I thought, I've not smashed a face in quite a while, but according to my 16 PF, I kind of like it. And so I was all ready, and I heard this, and I turned around, and he goes, oh, stop, big boy. And I said, you never sneak up on someone like me in the dark. And he put his arm around my shoulder, and he goes, can we just talk a little bit about what just happened back there? I said, no. He goes, listen for just a minute. He said, Martin, while you were humiliating all of us, he said, I looked around that circle, and he goes, everybody around that circle was at least a millionaire, most of them 5, 10, 15 million. He said there was one that was worth 50, one probably 150. There was another one that was a quarter billionaire. I said, what's your point? He said, those guys could have funded your ministry really well. And I looked at him and I said, do I look like the kind of bloke to you who would sell my soul for a few million? He said, mate, you don't get to come tomorrow night. You need 2 days. 2 days to fast and pray. I said, seriously, don't come back. Don't come back. So I showed up at 11 o'clock the next night. There were 11 men. I said, okay, let's start. It's very simple. Do you love God with all your heart? You start. Yes, 11 yeses. I said, okay, now we can have the real conversation. We finally broke up at 2:45 in the morning. It's kind of conversations most men never get to have. I saw strange things. I saw guys who were uni gridiron players, sobbing uncontrollably, and a mate worth 50 million holding him like a little baby. And this is weird. Men broke through to the actual heart and soul issues of Jesus. It was interesting. Between breakfast and lunch the next day, I had 9 of the 11 wives come and find me. And they go, we had no idea what conversation you had with our men last night, but something happened. Several of them got apologies, heartfelt they'd never had. Almost all of them said, he somehow was in tears. I've not ever seen him cry. Of course, women have to know. So they said, "What did you guys talk about?" And the most common response is, "What happens at the fire stays at the fire." Think about it. When's the last time you were in an environment where it was just safe to be free? Men, when's the last time you were within a group of guys and thought, I can have a conversation about what's really in my soul? Those are hard to come by. If you have it, don't annoy those people. Keep them forever. Because see, it stands in marked contrast to Simon and his religious spirit. Forgive me, but for some of you, you've polished this religious spirit quite well. You see, a spirit of religion seeks to substitute religious activity for the power of God's Spirit in their lives. Religious spirit goes like this. We sort of want credit for how well we're doing, how hard we're trying. It calculates and keeps track. It's like you keep score. You evaluate yourself, you evaluate others. Some of you are harder on yourself, some of you are harder on other people. You judge the activities, behaviors, even the motives of other people. You somehow want credit when you give a little extra of some sort. And you assume that your opinion and God's are almost identical. And so not the case. And it limits your freedom and your capacity to love. Let's wrap this up, shall we? I want you to capture the power of a changed life here. This woman would make so many of us uncomfortable. Because see, we actually have labels for people like her. She was one of those. It's funny when you're one of those and someone labels you as one of those, you don't even have to explain it. Everybody goes, "Oh, I know those. She was one of them." Yeah. But somehow she got this freedom thing with this encounter with Jesus. It was really quite remarkable. So it's about loving authentically. And then, forgive me, this is so not Aussie, but she expressed it with this reckless abandonment. She was free, not controlled, not calculated, not wondering what people would think. Just free to express this thing of loving and living and giving the best of who she was and what she had. So tonight, let's sort of look at when Jesus heals your life. What's it look like? What you move from this isolation protectionist thing to being connected with him and basically with other people as well. Let's just take you back to the text, folks. Nobody can say it better than Jesus. It really is about love. Those who've been forgiven much love much. Those who've been forgiven little love little. They keep track and they keep score. And they always seem to create a scenario where they have to win. So as we wrap up tonight, this is just a simple offer to you. That kind of freedom is remarkably amazing in life. Very few people get it because they're focused on themselves. So let's be honest. There's a handful or more of you here never welcome to this kind of freedom in your life. You know it. It's because you're mildly uncomfortable right now, and we get that. Don't want to make you uncomfortable. There's just this thing that just needs to be put aside and moved on. That's what Jesus does best. And then there's a couple handfuls of you who work so hard to manage your life. You hate the fact that someone might call you controlling. But let's be honest, it's what you are. Because you're still trying to keep control of the image. And Jesus goes, yeah, it doesn't work very well. Ask Simon. Ask Simon. So I'm just going to give you the next 30 seconds or so to think this through. It really is about loving him with all your heart. And then if you're one of those people tonight that wants to say, hey, look, it's time for me. It's time for me to get this depth of the love of the Father deep in my own soul. It's time for this freedom to come, so I got this reckless abandon. be a little less control. Actually, a lot less control. Just going to ask you in the next few minutes, if you're one of those, next few seconds, if you're one of those people, just to stand where you are, and I'm going to lead you through a very directed prayer of leaving some stuff behind and welcoming this freedom of Jesus. A couple more seconds. If you're ready for that kind of release and freedom tonight, just stand where you are. Come on. You know who you are. Several of you. Come. By the way, some of you are actually calculating in your head, should I, shouldn't I? Yeah. It's a freedom thing. Pray with me, please. God, I love how you work. We sang it earlier. You're a good, good Father. I think it's even way past that. There's no one like you who gets the experience of the human soul. And whether it's the woman with a dreadful story or the bloke who just needs to be released from control, you get that. So tonight, for these who've stood, come in a way that only you do so well and bring a release. They'll give you part of it, but then by your Spirit, reach in and pull the rest out. And come on, don't leave that. Give me that one too. Give me that one. Come on. Give it all to me. And show them what it's like to be loved by the Father and to actually love back with all their heart. Such a great phrase. So there's going to be the birth of a couple of new wild men tonight. For those who haven't taken full advantage of it, may they be uncomfortable between now and midnight and go, it's your time, come on. So for those who have courageously stood, may they just have this sense of the hand of a father who blesses a child. Hand of the Father on the head, speaking the name, pronouncing forgiveness, and welcome and release. Yeah, let them enjoy the next moments and days and weeks and months of new life and freedom in Christ. You're a good, good Father. Thank you. In the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. You may be seated.